The Choircast podcast is brought to you by The Edge of the Inside by Jeremy Jernigan. I wrote this book about my journey leaving my dream job as a multi-site megachurch pastor in 2020 and how I learned to see both the church and God differently from the edge. If you've ever felt like the Christianity you were handed doesn't match with the Jesus you read about, this book is for you. It's available now on Amazon.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Well, hi, friends. Welcome back to the podcast called This Is Not Church. So glad that you're here with us today. Nat is out of town. He's actually in town in Humboldt with John and I, but he is not with us in location. But we are here with John. So if you want to say hi, John.
Hi, John.
I always feel so awkward saying the thing that Nat always says, but Thank you for being consistent. It is.
I try.
Truly amazing. I know that I can count on you every time. Makes me feel safe. But we have an amazing guest as always here. We've got Jeremy Jernigan with us, and he is somebody that I've met once before on the interwebs. Such an amazing human. But Jeremy is a writer, speaker, and a recovering megachurch pastor. After 2 decades in full-time ministry, including serving as a lead pastor, he now focuses on helping people rebuild their faith after it breaks. He hosts the weekly Rebuilding Faith series and the biweekly Cabernet and Pray podcast, which I was on at one point. It was so much fun. We opened wine and talked for an hour and a half. It was amazing. Jeremy lives in Arizona with his wife and his 5 kids, and he has the latest book out called The Edge of the Inside: When Losing Your Place Means Finding Your Soul. So just want to welcome you to the podcast, Jeremy. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you, guys. It's exciting to be on the pod. We've had this lined up for a long time.
Yes, so it has been a while.
My anticipation is so high. It is building.
No.
That's all I've been thinking about for months is this conversation.
Your mind will be blown, my friend. You are in for such a treat. That's awesome. Oh, well, I'm really glad that you're with us today on this podcast. Have you been doing a ton of podcasts lately?
It's slowed down, but they're, when you're in book promo phase, It's like you're talking to all sorts of people, which it's, anyone who has tried to produce something like a book, you go in all these different modes where you're in writing mode and it's like you're by yourself. No one cares. No one knows. And then you're in editing mode and you have a team, and then it's like, hey, tell everybody about the book. And it's a completely different thing.
Sure.
But I actually love it. And I love getting to meet new people. I love hearing stories and sharing stories. And I love at the end of it, the feeling that I get almost every single time is this sense of all of us going, oh, we're not alone.
Yeah.
We're not all crazy.
Yeah.
And that's so just the coolest takeaway from these conversations.
That's awesome. Well, one of the first questions we like to ask our guests is just to share a little bit about your spiritual journey and what landed you to today. And I know that you do write a little bit about that in your book, but bring us into the current moment. How did you get to where you are today?
How long do you want me to answer that question?
As long as you need 3 or 4 hours, no big deal.
Yeah. I'll need it to give that question its proper place. Oh man. Short answer, as short as I can make it. I grew up in the church, 2nd generation pastor. So I loved it. I loved the church. I love growing up in it, seeing all the beauty of it, and wanted to go do it myself. Went into church ministry, spent 2 decades doing it. Thought that being a lead pastor was my dream job. And when I was 35, I got the chance to have my dream job, which how many people can say that. I was so fortunate and thought I was going to retire there, move to the Pacific Northwest, change my phone number, which nobody does anymore. But that's how committed I was, this is it. I want to have a local area code. And that's when people were like, oh, you're serious. I'm like, oh, I'm serious. I'm retiring here. Mm-hmm. And it did not go as planned, which has led to my latest book. But 3 years into that, I realized this dream job is not what I thought it was going to be. I think what I had was this naive belief in what the church is. And it was really looking under the hood for me. And, I say not all churches are like this, but a lot of them are. And when you look under the hood and you see some of these things, you go, wow, this is problematic and we should probably talk about this. And then realize the church didn't want to talk about this. And I was, viewed as the one bringing the problems into the church because I was addressing things that the church didn't want to talk about. And, we can get into all of that. But that was a disillusioning reality. And so I ended up stepping away from that role in 2020, which when you step away from what you thought was your dream job, you go into a really dark liminal space where you're like, what the hell am I doing now? I don't, it's like, I've got a master's degree in the Bible and I don't know if I want to talk about the Bible anymore. I've got 2 decades of church ministry. I don't know if I want to be a part of the church anymore. I mean, it was like all of these massive questions. And so I think I've spent the last 6 years in a sort of liminal space. And just, I think in the last 2 years, coming up for air where I'm starting to get a sense of maybe how God is going to use all of that in this next season and how I can use what I went through to benefit others who are going through their own similar journeys. So
that's amazing.
Dang. I'm curious about in that liminal space that you've been in for the past 6 years and even the last 2 years where you feel like you've kind of gotten more a broader vision, I suppose, for what the newness of your faith will look like. Did you start the podcast and keep pressing into those spaces because you just couldn't help it, or because you were curious, or you wanted to find other like-minded people? What made you decide to keep moving in that direction?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, part of what I believed was that the church is the best space to have real, authentic conversation. I grew up seeing conversations like that happen. And so I had this belief in me of that's where real, authentic, let's strip it all down, kind of conversation. And as a pastor, I mean, there are people that will tell you everything, hey, let me just unload my life story to you, the day you meet them. And so you do have this sense of we're getting to real stuff here. What I learned in 2020, this is in the midst of the COVID epidemic. So everybody, was not meeting the way they normally were. And then the George Floyd murder happened, and Portland, where I was, became one of the epicenters of the response to that, just in our culture. And so everyone around us is leaning in. They're all wanting to talk about this. What does this mean? And for me, I'm this is the conversation we have right now. We lean in, we meet the community around us, and to be told in no uncertain terms, we are not talking about that, just preach Jesus.
Wow.
And it was I don't know how to just preach Jesus and then neglect all of the hurting people around us. You want me to separate those, and I don't know how to do that. But I always wanted to have the conversation. So I think as I walked away from that, I'm well, where does this conversation happen then, right? And it was that was my own journey of let's explore this. And so I started having conversations around wine, where I realized people were more honest when they had a glass of wine. And I was let's start there. I was literally rebuilding, what does honest, authentic conversation look like? And so I've done a lot of wine events in bars and, trips in wineries. And I've found that those are great environments. Then the podcast became one of those things of what if I invited people to have a glass of wine with me while we talked about God and we talked about faith and we talked about church, and let's bring that same level of authenticity that I have with someone over a glass of wine. Let's bring it into the podcast realm. And as you guys know, podcasts, you can do whatever you want. I mean, they can go as long as they want. There's not the same rules and regulations. And so for a guy that spent, 2 decades in church land where it's you have timers and you have, all these other barriers, I was this is amazing. And so getting to talk to authors and pastors and theologians and people who have walked away and want to burn the whole thing down and everyone in between, I love those conversations. And I love when it's real and, it's say what you want to say it how you want to say it. And then getting to meet I met someone on Sunday. I was preaching at a church. I was guest speaking, and someone that out of the blue pops up and is hey, I just want you to know your podcast has been life-giving for me to know that I'm not alone. And it's there are people looking for these conversations. And I think a lot of them are hoping that their church is going to be the place for that. And some of the churches are, But a lot of the churches aren't. And so these people are like, where else do I go? And so they find podcasts like this one, or they find books, or they find, spaces where they can go, hey, can we talk about some of the shit going on like in the church right now and like in Christianity and in our culture? Like, can we be real about that and try to make sense of it? And so I love having the chance now to be like, oh yeah, let's dive into it. And I have really enjoyed that medium. And I still speak in churches, but it's not my primary, land of communication any longer.
Yeah. Nat and I have a very similar story to you. Nat more so than me. Nat was in ministry for a very long time. I was in ministry for a short time, as you
were
know.
Smarter than us. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I left the church when I was 18 and then came back to the church in my 40s and came back as an associate pastor. Worked my way up to an associate pastor and then realized I still couldn't make it work. And so I started blogging is what I did.
Yeah.
And just started asking all the questions that I couldn't ask in church. And that's what became my book. I actually converted that into a book. So, and then the podcast came out of that because I finished the book. Because I thought the blog was going to go on forever. I thought, I can blog this. I can blog these questions forever. But after about a year in, I'm like, no, I think I see the end. Then I was like, well, what do I do now? And in the meantime, I'd been listening to like Heretic Happy Hour and other podcasts like that. So I was like, what if I did that? What if I brought people on, starting out with our close friends that we had been sharing this information with, right? And then just reaching out and grabbing people. And the shocking part, I don't know if you found this to be true, how many people say yes?
Oh gosh.
And how many people want to have this conversation?
And the freedom they have to go like, yeah, let's talk about this stuff. And when you try to have these conversations, whether it be in a church or in a community or, and you are told like, hey, we're not doing that here. You have all this bottled up, energy or questions, like you're saying, of like, it's got to go somewhere. And so I love that, you create these avenues for people. And then, I always find it so funny. I have people like, hey, do you want to enjoy a good glass of wine with me and talk about God? And it's amazing the people that say yes. And then I love now, because the same for me, as I started with people I knew. And then now it's like, I'll just see someone interesting and I'm like, hey, do you want to talk? And so I get to meet people. Like, so how I met Bethany. I saw her on TikTok and I'm like, hey, this is fascinating watching these videos. Like, let's get to know you. And that's how we did.
That's cool. Well, I was interested in what were the first like linchpins that started to break for you as you were in church, that you were like, hey, this isn't right. This isn't working for me anymore.
I think one of the obvious ones is I never felt comfortable with the way the church handled the LGBTQ community. And I was, mainstream evangelical. And I actually had a book that I released 10 years ago where I was much more conservative in my thought point at that. And I had a section where I talk about this. And I even say in that book, of anything in this book, I think I'm most likely to change my mind on this one. Yeah. And it's so funny reading that 10 years later, because I absolutely have changed my mind on it. But I can see in that version of me 10 years ago, someone that's like really struggling. Right.
Yeah.
And trying to like toe the line and like do everything right, but also really having a hard time with it. And so I think there's things like that where, I remember even as a lead pastor, and we were not an affirming church, so to speak. And so I was getting really creative with like, how do we include this community without being able to fully say, you're welcome here. But I have this memory where I remember that there's this gay man who started coming, and he had lost his partner. And so he's just like this widower and, not dating anyone actively, but he's a gay man. Like that's how he, understands his identity. And he told me he had never, ever felt comfortable in a church before. Like this was the first time in his life. Okay. So he would come to 2 services a weekend. We had a Thursday night service and then we did 3 on Sunday morning. He would come to Thursday night and then he would come to 1 on Sunday, and he would sit in the front row right in front of me, and he'd sit by himself. And you couldn't miss him. I mean, it's like, it's like he's by himself. No one sits in the front row, at least not in our church, right? So you could see this guy, and he had so much joy of feeling welcome in a church. And yet I remember at one day, like looking over and realizing, I wonder how many people in our church are uncomfortable with him being here. And that was just like this reality of, he feels safe to be here, but I wonder how many people are not really good with this and wish that I would, talk to him, or I don't even know what they would want. But that was always a tension. And so I think, I had these things. And what was weird for me, and I don't know if you had a similar experience, as soon as I stepped away from formal church ministry, I changed my mind on a bunch of things. And it caught me off guard. And what I realized was, I was in covenant with this community, and I wasn't allowing myself to get too far in front of where the people were. And when I no longer had that, it was like I could just be me and be like, okay, what do I believe? And then I realized oh yeah, I'm fully affirming. I don't believe the traditional view of hell at all. I believe Jesus is saving everyone. I just started realizing that's what I believe. And when I started getting honest about that out of full-time ministry, that's when I started getting uninvited to speak in a lot of the places where I was getting invited. And then I realized, oh, this is the next level of that, right? Is now you're getting punished because you're not towing the party line on this. And so I think there's always that tension of people who are trying to stay in the church and also trying to stay true to really what they understand about the truth. And, Bethany's navigating it in 2 churches because she's a show off. But for the rest of us, it's hard to do, you know what I mean? And it was a challenge for me, certainly.
It is. It's such a challenge. When you were talking about that sense of leaving the church and you're going at the pace that the church is going with maybe one step ahead. But I just got this vision of you cutting a cord and you're just boom, way far ahead, way further than you thought you would go as quickly as you went. And that can be really freeing in a lot of ways, but it can also be really scary. Where do your feet land? And I'm curious about this whole deconstruction that you had to go through and, moving away from this very disillusionment from being in a mega church and having to toe the line and having to walk that line of being really careful with what you say and how you behave and what you post and, getting your hand slapped. What did it look like for you to go into that wilderness realm and then come out of it? And maybe let's just talk about the wilderness for a bit. You had to kind of step into this wilderness existence of how do you manage without those guardrails in place that was given to you in that church setting? I'm curious about that. And then within that as well, how was your family? Were they on board with you too?
My family was incredible, and huge, kudos to my wife, because I would not have been able to navigate what I did as much as I was able to, process a ton of stuff without having a super supportive spouse. And one of the coolest gifts my wife gave me was, she said, look, you have financially carried the load for our family for our whole marriage. She's like, I don't want you to go back into church ministry because that's how you make money and you need a paycheck. If you go back into the church, I want it to be because you believe in it and you think that's what God has called you to do. And she's like, so right now I will provide for our family. I'm going to, do it in this season, and you get to go figure out what's next for you. And which is a humongous gift to be given, where it's oh, okay, so I didn't have to rush back into a church. I think a lot of pastors I know have a really traumatic experience and they rush right back into a new place. And it's really hard to grieve. It's really hard to make sense of things when it's now we're replacing it and now we're meeting new people and there's new excitement and new novelty, right? I just sat in it. For years, just sat in it, and it sucked. And there was, I would say true, not I feel kind of depressed, but a depression came over me of what does any of this mean anymore? And who am I? And I realized for me, and I think guys are more susceptible to this, I had so much of my ego wrapped up in I'm a lead pastor. And man, that felt good. And when I was meeting people, that was an immediate identity I had to share and to, kind of make sense of the world. And I mean, just as a guy, when I'd meet someone, they'd be like, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" I got to the point where I would make jokes. I'm retired. And they're like, "You're retired?" But like, I didn't know what else to say because it was such an uncomfortable question for me. And, I would try to like, well, I'm kind of exploring some things, and it's just like all of it sounded lame. Right. And it's like, I don't know what I'm doing right now. And so if I felt comfortable with the person, I would usually just say like, "Look, I'm coming off of a real tough season. Things didn't work out. I don't know." But I went to counseling. I just started like, I'm going to sit in this. And, what ended up being the book was I started writing some of this stuff out more as therapy for me. Like I need to I need to write this out and like see it, like what did it feel like to go through these? So a lot of the stories that are in the book, I wrote out almost immediately in that first year or two afterward, not really knowing what they would become. I tried to write the book multiple times, but it never felt right. And it had the wrong tone or the wrong posture. I didn't know what am I offering people in this story? It was like all of that. But now I look back and go, that was the liminal space. And the question that I got asked, this caught me a little bit off guard. All the time, people would be like, "Are you and Jesus okay?" And it was such a funny question to me because I was like, Jesus didn't do this to me. Like the church did. And so Jesus and I are good because theologically, I had already deconstructed my evangelical view of Jesus long before that. So I think I had a pretty robust understanding of who Jesus was. We were good. But what I would tell people is like, the church and I are not good. Like we have some things to work out. And that took me years to work that out. And so I think the guardrails that came off were, what things have I accepted because a church told me this is the way, not because it's actually true or I actually ever felt that from Jesus? That's a dangerous question to ask, right? And I think, like, I'll give you one example. I started challenging in my own life my views of purity culture because I was raised in purity culture, and again, it didn't affect me as a male the way it would affect a female, but I still had all those same stigmas and all those same associations with it. And we have 5 kids. So it's like, I don't want to raise my kids with the shame of purity culture. Okay, well then what am I raising them with? What am I telling them? What does a healthy sexuality look like? Well, when you remove yourself from the guidelines that you were given, it's kind of a scary conversation to have. And it's also very exhilarating where it's like, let's explore this. And so in the last few years, I have stumbled into a number of conversations where I'm like, whoa, that one is intriguing. Let's dive into that. And I'll tell you this. When you go on a journey like this, and I suspect any of your listeners will be like nodding to this, like, yep, people around you who have known you when you were playing by the rules will be very concerned about you. And you start getting family members and friends and loved ones who start showing, I think, good intended concern, but it's concern. And I had, a family member close to me say, "I don't know where you'll be in 2030. And I was like, "What's 2030? And he's like, "It's just, 4 years from now, but at the rate you're going, I don't even know what you believe." And it was one of those like, like you are so concerned about this version of my journey with Jesus. And really, I would say I've never been better with Jesus. Like I love the way I understand and experience Jesus these days, but it doesn't fit well within what a lot of Christian churches would tell you have to do it. And That's the tension I live in now. And so it's easier as a guest speaker when you just pop in and you say some things and you pop back out, right? And you're not the main voice every single week, but it does come up still where I'll say something or I'll write something. And, people in those churches will be like, whoa, what's going on here? What does that mean? And you just have to kind of just walk people through that. And I love it, but it is a bit unnerving as well.
Well, I think a lot of times actually, we tend to find our faith in the faith of others. And so if our friend's faith or our pastor's faith or the leader's faith gets wonky, or they start questioning things or posting, sharing articles on Facebook that make you wonder like, oh my gosh, do they even believe the same things anymore? It can be really concerning. And people's faith is kind of like a house of cards in some ways. If you pull one part out, even if it's somebody else's faith, that can be really shaky. And I'm wondering, like, how do we avoid platforming pastors to where, people are wanting to place their faith in a pastor or place their faith in somebody else's belief? How do we avoid platforming people like that, whether it's through TikTok or whatever else, and invite people into like a faith journey on their own? Like, how do we do that as people today?
In my experience, I think one of the problems is I start referring to what we understand of the church as the machine. And this is the language I use in the book. There is a machine. And when you run it and when you're in a seat that is running it, you learn very quickly how the machine works. If you put this in, the machine operates. If you don't do this, then it starts to stutter and the machine wants to keep going. And so I think the problem is we've created a model of what we think of as normal. And it's so broken, it's so dysfunctional, and we don't talk about it. So for me, I'll say this. I was the lead pastor of a multi-site megachurch where 2 of the campuses only ever saw me on video. That's how they got the teaching. And, it's 2,500 people on any given weekend. There's no way I can know that many people relationally. It's just the numbers don't work. So the very model itself creates this celebrity where you are given this voice over all the community without relationship, because it's not possible to have a relationship like that. Then we start assuming, okay, the pastor's got to be good at everything. You've got to be the shepherd. You got to be able to sit, at the hospital bed of someone. You also have to be charismatic and dynamic and funny in a sermon. And then you have to be strategic with our budget. And nobody has all of those. Like, no one does, but the model expects it. And so the tradition I come out of, these lead pastors are expected to have all of it. And no one does, but a lot of them do a good job of looking like they have all of these skills, right? And if you don't know behind the scenes enough, you think, yeah, they're doing all of it. I think it starts with challenging the model and saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't be a part of these gigantic communities that are impersonal by nature. Maybe we should look for something a little bit different. So one of the things that's been healing for me, and if you would have told me this 10 years ago, I would have been like, you're out of your mind. I speak twice a month at a Mennonite church, a small, tiny, one service Mennonite church where you can know everybody. You can tell who's not there. I mean, it's like in a half round. So like you see people, it is as different to what I'm used to as you can imagine. And I love it because there's something so raw and refreshing. And people in the community will apologize. Oh, sorry, this must be so much smaller than what you're used to. I'm like, it is. And I love it because you can't create the same type of a celebrity in that environment. It doesn't produce that. And so to me, I'm not anti-church. I'm not anti-megachurch. I am cautioning us to say, hey, I think we would do well to look at our models of church today and figure out what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses. And if we are recognizing weaknesses, let's figure out what are we going to do about that? How are we going to try to balance out the inherent weakness of this model? And I don't see many people wanting to have that conversation. And so to me, it's like, hey, let's talk about that. I do a series on TikTok. With my wife started with me where she calls it Jerry, I have a question, and she'll ask things about the church. Well, that is like, of all the content I make, that gets the most traction of anything. And I don't know the questions are coming, and it's off the top of my head stuff. And so to me, I'm like, that's what I mean. I spend hours each week writing a blog post that I send out as a newsletter. I spend hours on the podcast. I spent months on the book, right? And these aren't the things that people are resonating with. They're resonating with this TikTok series because it's showing people behind the scenes. It's showing them, hey, here are the issues with it. Now, I've heard from numerous friends of mine who are pastors that are like, we don't like that you do this. You're making the church look bad. And I think that's the tension is I am making the church look bad if your view of the church is that it only looks good and it's only strengths. If that's what you want it to be, I am going to poke holes in that because I think there are issues. But I'm not bitter, disgruntled, burn down the church, which, there are those people. I'm not in that camp. And so I think people don't know how to listen to a critique from within the church sometimes. And yet I think that's what's needed for us to move forward without the same bizarre celebrity type status we've created.
It's kind of like magicians who show their secrets. And other magicians get
hilarious that you bring that up, John. My therapist,
yeah,
he calls me the masked magician because he's like, you're the magician showing everybody how the trick is done. And he's like, that's why that guy wore a mask, is all the other magicians wanted to kill him. He's like, this is why your other friends in ministry don't like you anymore. I'm like, it's true.
You're exposing everything.
Right. But like, to me, it's like, but I think like the masked magician, he loves the craft of magic. Yeah. So he's showing you these, not because he hates magic and thinks it's all fake, because he wants to bring something better and deeper and bigger. Like that's my heart. So yeah, I'm going to expose the crappy versions of it because I think there can be something better. So John, you and my therapist, you guys are locked in.
What made you decide to want that position at a megachurch? Like what was the
position of a lead pastor?
Yeah. What was the pull in you for that?
Let's go with that.
Okay. I think growing up in the church as a preacher's kid, that's the big show. That's the end all be all. And it's like I worked, kind of like John was saying, I worked my way up. I started as an intern right out of college and leapfrogged every little step along the way, and then was an executive pastor. And, finally it's like, well, where else is there to go? What else is there to do but lead a community? And as a communicator, like, yeah, sounds awesome. And I think it was, for me, it felt like the chance to, you can get it right? Like if you have the right people and the right spots and the right leadership, you could have the healthiest expression of the church. So I went into it thinking that, and then realized 3 years in, even if you're sitting at this seat, you still can't make the changes you want to make.
Yeah. I mean, that's similar to my story. Like I said, I worked up to associate pastor. I was the worship leader / associate pastor is what I was. And like you were saying, it's like showing, one of the things that I started realizing was how fake some of the stuff was.
Oh yeah.
That we did. And for me as a worship leader, writing, or not writing, but putting songs in specific orders, get the minor key song with the, with the really like tear jerking and, pull the heartstrings, because, nothing's better than seeing your congregation cry at the right point and saying the right words over the music. And then I got to the point where I was like, I don't even like the music anymore. I can't sing it. I can't do it. And that was one of the linchpins for me, was just the manipulation that was involved in the music part of church.
So same experience. I oversaw our creative arts department at a megachurch, and I knew, hey, you have to make sure the bass is turned up enough so that people feel the energy in the room, right? They feel the Holy Spirit. And we would do things like, baptism weekends where we would have spontaneous moments of baptism in the service. And we would have, you have to keep the music loud enough where people still have the energy and they want to come forward, but not so loud that it's drowning. You start to realize there are formulas for all of this. The lights have to be, dim enough where people aren't seeing. And I think it's hard when you're the one in the seat, moving the levers. It does kind of start messing with you where you're like, oh gosh. And I remember for me, one of the things I struggled with years ago was having to sign some of the checks of, hey, here's a new lighting system. Here's a new, audio system. And you're like, this is so much money. And it's not my money, but I'm thinking about, does like the typical person in the seat know how much money we're spending on this? And maybe they do, and they're good with it. I think some do. I think a lot of them will be very surprised. Like, we spent how much on that? I thought we were feeding people, or, it's like, no, This was millions to upgrade our lighting system. And it's like, oh. And so for me, those were all tensions of, I'm running this and it feels weird. And that was even the thing, like when I stopped, being a part of it, people were like, do you miss going to church? Because I had to just stop going to church for a while. And I was like, no, because for me, this was always a job. I never showed up and enjoyed it. I was always the one, planning it, scheduling it, running it. It was work. And so I never got to just show up and enjoy the experience like everyone else did. And so, I think for those of us who have been in it, it's really funky and really hard to separate that part of your journey.
Yeah. I found it interesting you talk about, are you okay with Jesus? Because that was a question that I had to ask myself because I've left the church. Church and I don't get along, and we probably won't anymore. But that's kind of where I'm at. But I found that as I was going, I did have to burn my view of Jesus to the ground and rebuild a Jesus model that I could believe in. And for me, and there's people who look at the historical Jesus are people that I'm very interested in. And I had to basically say, am I okay with taking away the miracles? Am I okay with taking away the virgin birth? Am I okay with taking away the resurrection? Would I still follow this man if I took all that away? And my answer to it was yes, because of what he taught. And I could connect with that, even pulling all that other stuff away. And I found that very interesting for myself. And I don't know how much of Jesus you had to tear down.
Well, I think I'm still tearing things down. And I don't know that I think if you are a naturally inquisitive person, I don't know that you ever stop tearing it down, right?
Yeah.
Like the latest for me, and I listen to Bart Ehrman's podcast every week. I don't know if you guys are Bart Ehrman fans, but I love Bart Ehrman, who's a Bible scholar who doesn't follow Jesus anymore, right? Doesn't believe any of it, which is an interesting, position. But he brings up things that I'm like, intellectually, he's right. For example, the early church didn't believe in the Trinity. They didn't teach the Trinity. They didn't understand the Trinity. And so there are passages that would seem to indicate a sense of the Trinity, and you can formulate that. But one of Ehrman's points that I think he's spot on is if you would say to any of the early disciples of well, obviously God exists as, 3 in 1, the Trinity, they would have looked at you like, what are you talking about? That just would have been a bizarre concept to them. So then I take that and go, why are we so sure that this is exactly what they all meant? Maybe we need to take a step back, make more room for the mystery of it all and go, I think it's messier than that. And I think I'm probably on a similar journey to you, John, where I'm I'm leaving room for the messiness of it. And I just did a study through the book of John. The way Jesus talks about the Father in John really doesn't fit in a Trinitarian view. And I hadn't really ever noticed it until I started challenging the Trinity and then did a study on John, and I was like, oh man, there are so many times that Jesus talks about the Father and it does not seem like we're both equal together. It's like it's something else. Now, again, what is it? I don't really know, but it's kind of messy and weird. And like, I can give you some ideas what I think Jesus was getting at. But to then say like, no, it has to be this creed and this belief. And, what's crazy to me is I used to say, like, for sure, if you would say, hey, can someone be a Christian if they don't believe in the Trinity? I'd be like, no, it's a non-essential. You have to believe the Trinity, right? And now I'm just like, no, I don't think you do. Like, I think you can still follow the Jesus way and believe it in all kinds of different ways. And I even wonder, when Jesus talks about there's a wide way and a narrow way, maybe the narrow way is like what you will spend your entire life pursuing of like, hey, we're going to keep trying to figure this out. And the wide way is how you start, right? Of like, hey, this is what everybody agrees. And then you start kind of getting closer and closer going, yeah, maybe it's not that, or maybe it's not that. And I love it, and I love that, for you, John, you're like, hey, I still would follow Jesus. I think I'm with you. Like, even if I couldn't make sense of the church, I am like so intrigued by Jesus. I think the way that Jesus models is a better way to live. Like, yeah, I'm intrigued by that. I'm now in a season that I don't even think I would say this on my own podcast, but I don't know that I believe a lot of the things that I used to think were just everybody, like virgin birth. I don't know if I still like, like stuff like that. Right. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's not that I believe or don't believe in it. I don't know if it's important.
Well,
that's kind of where I land on it.
But like, you say that to a Christian.
Well, right.
And they're like, what do you mean it's not important? It's the whole point of it,
Yeah.
Literally going to say the exact same thing, John, of just like, is it necessary to believe that? For some people, it is. Is it necessary for God for us to believe it? I don't know. I don't know if God needs us. I think we need it sometimes, and God allows things that we need, but I don't know if God needs that. Yeah. And allowing that, inconsistency, or not even inconsistency, just a curiosity to exist, and without having to be certain all the time. I love that picture of like the wide path that leads to a narrow path. It's like a honing in on what matters most. And when it all is said and done, what matters most is Jesus' one command that he gave over and over and over again, to love each other as I have loved you. And that's it. Like, how else can we filter it all? Let's filter it through that. And getting to that is like almost like you're going, I don't know, sometimes I get visuals and I just see us like, as we get into that narrow path and get smaller and smaller, all those excessive things that make us feel safe in some ways or help us make sense of things get just shaved off as we get into that smaller space. And what's left it's what's needed in life.
Well, I think when you start, like you said, Bethany, you need those creeds, those beliefs to make like, this is my scaffolding that I'm building this on. But you get to a point where it's like, no, I've like been down this road with Jesus for a while, and I've seen some things, and I have this like sense that like, I'm going to be okay, and Jesus is going to be with me. And so what I need now is, I totally agree. Some people need that like belief, but I think there are equal amounts of people that need to be able to challenge that belief and still have room. Like, it was my wife who said to me after all the Epstein stuff, she goes, hey, does anything about the virgin birth and God going to a teenage girl to have a baby, does that strike you anything weird with the Epstein files at all? And I just sat with that and I was like, that is something a dude would write. I mean, right? Like, then God came down to this virgin teenage girl. And it's like, did God need to go to a virgin girl? Like, I don't know. Like, the whole thing just kind of, in light of what we're seeing, does kind of feel a little bit creepy to me. And so I'm like, all right, what if that wasn't the way it happened? Like, what if Jesus was born and Joseph was his dad, right? Like, does it ruin the whole story? Some people would say, yeah, I don't think I would say it ruins the whole story. And so that's where, for me, I'm learning to take mystery and just make room for it.
And the story is really the story of humanity. Like, what does it mean to be fully human with this picture of Jesus kind of leading the way forward? And I think sometimes we get caught up into the weeds of like having to have an answer for everything or having to make everything make sense. And you look at like the cultural context of things like that. And there were many Greek myth stories of that time of gods and virgins. And so it's like, I think when I look at stories like that, there's just a better story out there that God's trying to bring forth that uses the current context, a cultural context of the day that helps people make sense of like, maybe there's something better than the stories we've been handed. Maybe there's something bigger that's happening around us, but we can't get there unless we see the stories that already exist. And God's like, let me show you this part here too, because there's more for you than what your brains can handle in this moment. It's always progressing people into greater capacities of love. Yeah. I'm curious about like what you still believe in the church after all these things that you've gone through. Why do you still keep a foot in? And do you still believe in the church? And do you have a vision for what the church could look like?
I think I must be a sucker for punishment because yes, I can't quit it.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I'm having this experience now where I spend a lot of time with Mennonites these days, and I'm learning all sorts of church tradition that I don't know, history I don't know, I wasn't a part of. A lot of people are like fifth generation. It's not my story. And yet there's a beauty in the way that they do it. And also, I don't expect them to have it figured out. I don't expect them to be perfect. And so I think when you adjust your expectations of the church, and I say that not the same way a lot of pastors are like, hey, the church is flawed, get over it. Basically as like a license, like we're going to screw you up and it's okay because we're human. I don't like that line of thinking at all. But I do think this acknowledgement of it's always going to be messy and it's always going to be funky and feel a little bit clunky at times. And yet, like, there are good expressions of it where you have people who want to follow a way of Jesus and a way that looks beautiful in this world and the way of love. And if you want to follow Jesus like that, like, yeah, I want to lock arms with you. I want to share a meal with you. I want to gather together and talk about beauty and truth with you. And that's the church to me. It's like, it's not, we have to gather in this way at this time and do these things. And we all agree to these things. If that's what you mean by church, like I'm out. Like, I don't want to sign any doctrinal statements. I don't really care about membership at this point. Like, these are not things that matter to me. But if there is a community of people interested in following the way of Jesus, I'm interested in being a part of that. And that to me that's the church. And so I think these days I'm more attracted to smaller versions of it than I ever was. And before I would have told you that, these are boring and lame and, awkward. And now I'm like, yeah, I think that's kind of the point. That's the idea. And I still, maybe I'll get to where John is at some point, but I'm holding on.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I have like very stringent guidelines on what I would expect a church if I was to step back into a church. And first and foremost, be LGBTQIA affirming. That would be like number one for me. I couldn't step into a church that wasn't affirming. That would be, they be willing to talk about BIPOC issues, and not shy away from them and realize that we're going to stumble along and we're going to make mistakes as we ask questions about these types of things. But to bury our head as, our BIPOC siblings are dying on the streets is horrendous. And so those would be some things that I would need to step back into a church. And I know there are churches like that.
Well, you should come hang out with me and the Mennonites because that's what I have found. And I mean, again, I don't know what listeners hearing Mennonites are like, what on earth is this guy talking about? These guys are like what I would consider progressives, and it's like so funny because I don't hear the word Mennonite and think progressive, but like theologically they're affirming. I gave this whole sermon right after Alex Preddy was shot, and I'm watching all this ICE activity, and I'm just like, hey guys, I'm going for it. Like the next day, like 13 minutes of my message were all about that. And there was like an uproar in the church. There was like 8 families. Again, this is a small community, like 8 families that were like, absolutely not. This is not the church. This is political, whatever. And in Mennonite fashion, we all gathered together. We had a hearing. They all got to share their piece. And then we moved on. And the church is like, hey, Jeremy represents the kind of conversations that we want to have here.
Wow. That's great.
And a number of them left. A few of them stayed. And we keep going. And I'm like, oh, cool. And I kid you, this is so crazy to me. We do like what every church does, like pizza with the pastor. Like if you're new, come, and like, so they do it too. Well, the last one we did was a couple weeks ago, and I'm sitting through this, and there's this family that, there's like a number of families that were new. And the question was, hey, how did you find this church? And like, we would love to hear. And they, they said, we searched in Google liberal church near me. And our Mennonite church popped up. And I'm like, I don't know how that works with Google, but this church popped up. So they're like, what's a Mennonite? Like they were so confused, right? But they're like, evidently they're like, we came the next week and we wanted to see like, is this like a mistake, or is this church actually going to be a progressive minded church? And then I was preaching that weekend. And in that message, I was talking about the fruit of the Spirit. And you'll love this, John. I talked about one of the reasons I became affirming was the realization of people in the gay queer community are absolutely demonstrating the fruit of the Spirit. And there was nothing in that lifestyle that inherently prohibited it. And because nothing in that lifestyle prohibits the fruit of the Spirit, I'm really cautious when evangelicals or whoever wants to be like, this is a sinful lifestyle that's going to stop. It's like, it's not. These are some of the most loving, Jesus-looking people, and their lifestyle doesn't seem to be hampering that at all. So I tell that story. And then this family says, and when Jeremy shared that story, we knew this was the church for us.
Wow.
And I'm
That's
like,
great.
I'm at a Mennonite church. Like, it's just blowing my mind. But I think that's what's giving me hope. Like, there are communities like this. And unfortunately, they're not, or maybe fortunately, they're not usually big because you don't grow a bunch of people with these ideas. A lot of the people are like, I'm out if you're not going to support this regime and you're not going to bash on the people that I hate. And yet there's beauty in these communities, and I suspect there's a lot of them.
Well, and I think it goes both ways. There's a lot of people that are like, I'm out if you do support this, or if you whatever. And so what I appreciate about what your experience has been with the Mennonites is they're willing to wrestle with it at least, or at least to hear multiple sides and to listen. And for some people, they might come to the end of that and be like, I just can't stay here for this reason or that reason. But they're willing to at least sit in the tension together and work through it, which is the most beautiful thing ever. I think that's how it's meant to be. And so I'm grateful that you get to be a part of that kind of community. And so you teach there twice a month. Are you considered their pastor?
No. So the way we've set it up, and this was new for them, is new for me. I said, look, I don't want to be a lead pastor. This is not my thing. I was like, I would love to do a couple times a month. I would be, great with that. And so there's another guy there who his gifts are shepherding. I mean, it's like, and so he's the guy that is full time, and he's the traditional pastor. He loves on that community. He is there for him, and he's perfect for that role. You know what I mean? Like, he's that guy, but he doesn't say things the way that I say things, and he doesn't, come out that. And that's what I bring. And so the community is basically like, hey, we think with both of you, we actually cover a lot of these gifts way better than expecting one person, who would lean one way or the other. And again, I'm going back, like, this is the way it should be, is not expecting one end all person, because that's when you get the celebrity, you get the pedestal, like you're everything. They don't see me as that. They see me as the guy that's there a few times a month, and I bring my gift and I bring my piece to it. And yet I'm not trying to be the end all, and the other guy's not trying to be the end all either. And I think that has been phenomenal. And I would encourage more pastors who are listening, like, decentralize your model, split roles, don't make it all about one person. There is a beauty inherently in the design of that.
Yeah. Do you find yourself part of the church too there? Like, do you connect with them outside of a Sunday gathering?
I do. It's an hour away from me.
Oh, dang.
So
yeah,
it's a little challenging, and it's an hour on Sundays when there's no traffic. So we're not California level traffic, but it's far enough where it'd be an hour and a half plus on like a normal, work day. And so that prohibits it. But it's enough where, usually what we try to do is like, hey, if I'm going to be out there on a Sunday, let's meet up for lunch, or let's meet up for, we do things. And there are people, it's funny, whenever, because I'm on the other end of town, whenever people in the community are on my side of town, they're like, hey, I'll be there on Friday. You want to meet up for, coffee or whatever? It's like, yeah, that sounds great. So we try to meet up strategically, or we meet in the middle, we make it work. But again, it's one of the challenges. I wish it was, down the street from me. That would be incredible. There are not a lot of communities around me like this one. And so it doesn't exist down the street for me. I have to drive an hour, and yet I think, make it work and get creative, and it's working so far.
I love it. That's awesome. What else are you working on right now? Do you have any more irons in the fire besides your podcast and this book? Are you looking for another book or anything?
I've started the next book, but man, it's so much work. And so I'm kind of like, I'll just slowly start working on that. My biggest change, this is like this week happening, is I just finished, I was doing a Rebuilding Faith series every weekend, which is 10-minute Bible messages, going through the book of John. I finished John. So 77 episodes, I went through the book of John.
Wow.
And I've been realizing doing 2 podcasts doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, that's kind of crazy. And so I'm going to indefinitely suspend that one. And then I'm going to make my Cabernet and Pray podcast go to weekly. And so I have been doing it biweekly. That's going to start going to weekly, and I'm going to do more solo episodes in addition to episodes where I partner up with someone. And that's where I'm going to start like, hey, what are some other things I want to talk through? Like, one of the things I'm going to launch with is I want to do a study of the book of Job from a deconstructed lens of like, how do we learn about Job's journey and what he went through in ways that a lot of us would go, oh my gosh, like I know that, And so I'm going to spend 8 weeks on that. But it'll be mixed in with interviews of other people as well. So that's kind of my latest thing I'm excited about. And then I guess, John, you stopped blogging. I still blog. I like the medium of writing, and I do it every Tuesday. And I like the discipline of like, you got to create a post, like write something every week. And I found that having that deadline forces you to think about, like, all right, what am I bringing? And so, those are the projects I'm working on. Hopefully another book's coming, but I'm still a little tired from the last one.
Man, well, that's really exciting, the things that you have coming down the wire. And for your Rebuilding Faith podcast that you're suspending, can people still access it after you have stopped utilizing it?
Yep. So all the episodes are on video, they're on audio, wherever you get a podcast. So, and I literally read every verse of the book of John. So I don't go verse by verse necessarily, like expanding them, but I read through every verse, 77 episodes. So it obviously took me almost 2 years to get through all of that. That's still going to be available. But I'm realizing like, hey, rather than trying to split, 2 different things, like I want to really pour my efforts into one. And what I have found is like the podcasts that I tend to listen to are weekly. And I'm like, I'm releasing this every other week. So you don't give people a chance necessarily to have the same rhythm. And so I'm like, okay, maybe trying to be a part of that. And,
that's cool.
As a creator, you guys know, you just constantly try stuff. You're like, let's see if this works. And, John turned it into a book, and you just keep trying things. And you're like, all right, what do I do now?
Yeah. I mean, I would say like that book, the Rebuilding Faith on John could be a really good book that people would be able to access on almost like a little mini commentary, which would be amazing.
I haven't even had that thought. There you go. Yeah. And you get to work on that.
Totally. There you go. All right. I got your next book in form for you. That's awesome. Well, this has just been amazing. Such an incredible time of talking with you and hearing about your story and just hearing more about who you are as a person. John, do you have anything else that you want to say before we wrap up here?
No, just thank you for taking the time to come and talk with us. It's been an amazing conversation. I've loved every minute of it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And for everybody who's still listening, you can find Jeremy's book. It is called The Edge of the Inside: When Losing Your Place Means Finding Your Soul. And I encourage everybody to pick up a copy because it is truly an incredible read about your own life, your own journey, and then what it means to deconstruct and even reconstruct. So please pick it up. Anything else that you want to share, Jeremy, before we close up?
I just want to say thank you to you guys for creating a space and inviting me in. And we need more of this. We need more of these voices. And, you know, I'm always so encouraged by these experiences. And, you know, Bethany, I had you on one episode and then I'm like, we're friends. You know, it's like, so John, we're friends now. Like we're in. And I just love, like, there's not many of us, I feel like at times against the sea, you know, of this tidal wave that seems to be going the other direction. And so when you get to talk with people who are like, oh, I really like the way you're following Jesus. I really like the way you're not, you know, creating more of the same. It's just so encouraging to me. So thank you guys for hosting me, and thank you for creating space for these conversations for everyone else to get to benefit from.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch. where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.